My name is Caroline Creeman. I work for AdviceWorks. We are a private client financial planning and portfolio management company.
My name is Paul Murray. I'm with NFP Asset Management and I run the NFPCI Stable and NFPCI Managed Funds. I'm the Managing Director of that business.
BIP, short for Boutique Investment Partners, is an investment consulting and investment management firm. And within investments, our area of expertise is multi-management. And I think our key value add to our key client, which is the independent financial advisor, is to influence the quality of investment decisions they make. So passives solve a lot of things for us. So on the one hand, it's risk management. By that is having made a decision on the type of beta exposure you want, or asset class exposure you want, or investment opportunity you want to be exposed to, you can either do that through an active manager or a passive product. With an active manager comes manager selection risk. For the right timing of that particular decision, you could easily destroy some value. It doesn't really matter how much it is from the active decisions. So passive does come in controlling the manager selection risk. So that's very, very important to us. I think the second part of it is, I think also just visibility around decision making of the process. So a lot of these passive solutions have good rules around how they're constructed, how they capture the various market drivers that you want, which also active managers do, but I guess there is much more visibility in the passive space than you would find in the active manager space. So I think for us, just visibility of how our decision is actually made sometimes is very important. And then I think in this low absolute return environment we've just been in, probably still are there, costs become very important, or the proportion of costs as a percentage of the total return increases. So to increase net returns to clients when returns are generally low, one of the easier ways to do that is to bring in passives where you probably get the same outcome but at a much lower fee.
We started using passive products inside of our portfolios about 7 or 8 years ago. We primarily brought them into the portfolios to make sure that the asset allocation decision we were attempting to get is the asset allocation decision we actually got in the end. We found that some of the products we were using prior to that led to too much deviation around our equity decision, bond decision, property decision, and we found that by bringing passives into the portfolio we could more accurately get to the asset allocation decision we were trying to make.
First started to look at passive investing when we could move funds offshore, because you had such a broad investment universe and we needed to try to narrow it down for clients. We didn't want exposure to all parts of the market, and we definitely wanted to have a lower beta than the market itself. So this is where we really started to look at quality factor funds, low volatility funds, momentum funds, just depending on what the client really required in their portfolio. What changed our perspective on smart beta index investing in South Africa was that it becomes quite hard to explain to clients, look, if you stock picked, well, this went wrong or this went wrong, and you didn't really have a good methodology to explain why it happened. The second thing is that our access to research as portfolio managers has declined, because so many offshore banks are closing and that we don't have research houses anymore. And simply because we're living in such a strange environment in South Africa at the moment, it is very difficult, even though we're trained to do it, to keep your emotion as a portfolio manager out of investing. So these funds become very, very valuable for us because they're methodical, they're rules-based, they've been back-tested. It is something you can explain to a client. It is something that, all else being equal, will probably get you a better optimal outcome than a portfolio manager who's just getting very nervous about South Africa.
There isn't actually a point at which we decide between passive and active. We think the argument between passive and active is redundant. Our view is that in order to get our asset allocation decision implemented effectively, what we try and do is make sure that the investment that we choose actually gets us the asset class that we want. There is no decision in the beginning of the process about whether we allocate active or passive. The decision is what is the best way to get our asset allocation decision implemented properly.
Let's talk about equities, where we've decided we want to have X% equities in a specific client solution. What you would find is our equity carve-out is sort of broken down according to what we believe the structural drivers of equity are. which is predominantly the 4 prominent investment styles, which is quality, value, momentum, and smaller caps, and would also add like market beta as part of those 4. So essentially you end up with 5 carve-outs within the overall equity at equal weight. So that's one manner in which active easily comes in. The second one, which is pretty much a variation of the first scenario, is where a client in particular wants the passive part to become the core part, and then there's different investment styles to be the satellites. So in this case, instead of equal weighting, we'll then increase the weight to passive as the core holding, and then the smart beta blocks, which is quality, value, momentum, and smaller size, become our satellite holdings within the equity carve-out.
In the current market, what we've noticed is a lot of active asset managers becoming more and more benchmark cognizant. What this means for you as an investor is that you end up paying high cost active fees for what becomes a solution that looks more and more like your equity benchmark. So a far more cost efficient way to allocate money to active management is to use a low cost passive core as a majority of your equity exposure, and allocate to a high cost, high conviction active asset manager on the satellite portfolios. This allows investors to get the best of both worlds, allowing their total equity exposure to be delivered at a much lower cost because of their low cost passive core, while keeping a few high conviction and high cost active managers in the satellite position.
Looking to counteract the risk of individual stock picking going forward, just the market we're in at the moment, the environment we're in at the moment, we need to look at a fund that's actually quite diversified. Looking at the top 50 gives us a broader exposure to a market that's actually got very, very large constituents in it.
So partly we chose top 50 for liquidity reasons and some market cap reasons. We found that the top 40 was too concentrated, and then what we were looking for was a product that allowed us to access equities in the most cost-efficient manner as possible, and we found that Aussie Swix products with a significant tail on them were just simply too expensive to allocate to, which leaves you by default looking at the larger cap products as your alternative there.
So in terms of looking for, like, I think like a beta product that covers much of the South African equity space, something like the Coreshares top 50 comes in, I think, top of our priorities for a lot of reasons. I think the one being having 50 shares as opposed to 40 shares in the top 40 automatically spreads your market coverage of the South African market. It allows you to capture the size premium. So for some clients, size premium really reflects the small, mid-cap size of it. In other contexts, it can be actually the large cap aspect of it. This one sort of gives you best of both worlds, where you do capture a lot of the large caps right all the way into the mid cap space, which we like. It addresses a lot of the concentration risks in a concentrated market like South Africa, where some of the stocks are quite big weights. The 10% cap on that index does help, and it brings in a lot of diversification for the South African equity market, and the low fees and all of those other factors do come in. So yeah, it would be a great pick for us for those reasons.
Coreshares takes inspiration from the concept of core satellite portfolio construction. So a key problem we were trying to solve at Coreshares was one of creating an efficient core allocation for investors. What we mean by that is efficient access to South African equities. So we selected the S&P South Africa 50 index, and we selected it for a number of reasons. The first was that it covered 50 shares and not typically what would be 40 shares. And that extra 10 shares gives us extra coverage of the market, so a broader representation of the South African market. What it also does is it solves for a concentration problem that we have in the South African market by capping the largest share at 10%. And then being large liquid shares, of course, it's very efficient. So we preferred and we use the top 50 index as the efficient equity exposure that we believe investors should be using as a core part of their portfolio.
We found ourselves quite early adopters in the passive space. We believe that passive instruments allowed us to allocate to asset classes more effectively. The fact that they come to you at much lower cost, potentially with more liquidity, whereas secondary and tertiary benefits, the primary benefit was to get the asset allocation decision right. Why other institutional investors haven't yet allocated to passive versus active probably lies in a persistence of belief that active can potentially outperform passive, even though the evidence in the last 4 or 5 years suggests otherwise.
I think South Africa is a very small market with a very small number of managers compared to many other markets. And in that small number of managers, what you find is people start having brand loyalty and maybe attachments to specific active managers. And I mean, there's so many reasons why that attachment naturally grows, but it's generally the small size of the market. So new concepts like passives take a long time to sort of take hold or establish themselves in the market, because a lot of professionals still have to get over the attachment they have to the different active managers, and not enough work has also been done on the actual benefits of making use of passives. And I think the other reason is that the debate around, or the discussions rather, have been so fixated on eliminating one and choosing the one, so much that I think when you have this whole brand attachment and then you're engaging in discussions where it appears or comes across as if you have to get rid of everything active and go passive, it becomes such a big step to make. I think it's just embracing that both can be used in a portfolio as opposed to one over the other. That could actually increase use of passives in South Africa.
I think there are a lot of fund managers out there that are very reluctant to use indexing or smart beta as a strategy. And I think the big reason for that is fees. You know, it's very difficult to justify why you're sitting in an office if you're essentially, using something that's just really created by a computer. But there is value to be added for an active manager. You can select the part of the investment indexing universe that you actually want to be in. There's going to be a time to be in dividends. There's going to be a time to be in momentum. There's going to be a time to be in low volatility. And that's really where your area of expertise should be, because your stock picking ability in the future is going to be very limited because people have access to so much information about the market.